Hi class, again my name is Miss Celine, and right now we're going to talk about the key thinkers in cross-cultural communication. So in here we're going to talk about a lot of theorists and how they defined culture. Alright, so to further discuss to you, let's go first to the learning objectives. First, discuss the views of selected researchers of cross-cultural communication and assess the value and application of the research. Second, determine a basic theoretical and methodological approach to a clearer understanding of the relationship between culture and communication. And third, enumerate the key theories and discuss the advantages and limitations of each and their application to the understanding of the effects of culture. So for our reference, we're going to discuss actually use cross-cultural communication theory and practice by Brian J. Hearn and Barry Tomalane. So that's pages 20 to 46. So the summary of this chapter is this chapter, which is according to the book, discusses the views of 6 selected researchers of cross-cultural communication and assess the value and application of their research. The key thinkers discussed are Edward T. Hall and Mildred R. Hall, Gerd Hofstede, Fons Trompenaars, John Moll, Richard D. Lewis, and N. Bennett. Let's go first to the Edward T. Hall and Mildred Hall. But first, Edward and Mildred Hall, together with Gerd Hofstede, are arguably among the most well-known leading researchers in the field of cross-cultural communication. Their key ideas are in many cases complementary and basic and provide a basic theoretical and methodological approach to a clearer understanding of the relationship between culture and also communication. So let's start first with Edward T. and Mildred R. Hall. So both of them are actually American psychologists. So the Halls are, they believe that there are different communication styles used, and this impact the behaviors on the way in which people do business with those from different cultures. So actually their goal is to actually know and understand the cultures from different companies between the US and also the European companies. I'm sorry, I meant to say companies a while ago. So they're focusing on the communication, on also the culture within the company. Edward T. and Mildred R. Hall, the Halls introduced 2 key principles into the study of cross-cultural communication. One related to communication itself, and the other related to the organization of time. So again, there are 2 key principles: communication itself, and then the other one is the organization of time. So communication and organization of time. The Halls identified 2 styles of communication in business, which they called now high context and low context communication. So let's go to it further. Let's start with high context. Let me read it first. A high context communicator is one who gives instructions and comments through suggestions rather than directly, and whose communication information is implicitly contained. High context people tend to rely heavily on elaborate system of symbols, body language, intonations of speech, and hidden culturally based meanings. Simple terms in high context communication in here, logos, symbols, and also non-verbal cues are very much important. So for me, let me give you an example. So for example, Starbucks. Starbucks is actually a very famous cafe, coffee, and also it serves basically coffee. It's very expensive, though it's still popular. Everyone wants Starbucks. I mean, if your coffee is not Starbucks for others, they actually would judge you. That's actually realistically speaking, but that's how it works. I mean, that's how high context works. I mean, Starbucks, from the name itself, it doesn't mention any coffee in there. It's just simply Starbucks. No coffee intended, but people know that it's actually an expensive coffee, and it was a really good coffee. So that's one of it. Another would be, I guess, another would be bench. So bench literally is a name for a seat. I mean, where people can actually sit, that's actually bench. But we have in the industry a company that caters um, clothing, and that's called bench. And now it's not just clothing, it's actually anything that's essential, like, for example, perfume, belts. Also, I believe they're now offering some of the bags, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken. But as you can see, bench itself is just a name. It actually not. They're not even selling bench. I mean the benches on the corridors or the benches at the park. They're not even selling bench. But as you can see, people know that if they heard the word bench, it automatically comes into their mind that it's actually a clothing. So as you can see, those are high context. So symbols are very much important. Hidden meanings are also important. So that's high context. Further, in such cultures, people assume that everyone has most of the essential information they need. Because of this, there's little need for explicit rules and clarifying statements, and therefore communication can be economical, fast, and efficient. This means that the person receiving the message or instructions has to read between the lines to work out the real meaning of the message. People in high context cultures tend to be more accustomed to interpreting meaning in accordance with such factors as personality, rank, and body language. So as you can see, high context in a culture, in an organization or in a place where there's a high context culture, you have to read between the lines. It does not tell you what it is. You have to read between the lines. You have to check on the symbols, what they're actually selling, and many more. Another one would be a pancake house. Pancake house, I don't know if they're even selling, maybe they're offering pancakes, but they're not basically just pancakes, right? So that's an example of high context culture. Furthermore, high context culture, some of the countries in here are Japan, Korea, Arab, Chinese, Italians, and other Mediterranean countries. As you can see here, they are the ones who actually gives meaning. They are the ones who look forward to give symbols and indirect communication. So for others to actually think on the meaning behind of everything. So relationships in high context are long-lasting. Their language are indirect and also implicit. Nonverbal communication is very essential to them, especially the gestures, the silence, and agreement tends to be oral. So they don't usually have any, like here in the Philippines, we do like contracts and many more. So a lot of their agreements are actually oral. So we have the terms insiders and also outsiders. When we say insiders in here, these are the peoples who work on the culture of high context inside the company or the organization, and they were able to understand what's the meaning behind of everything. While outsiders here are the people who needs to adjust first to further understand what's the high context communication is all about. So as you can see, insiders, the ones who are working inside the organization and understand already what needs to be understood. And the outsiders, these are foreigners. They don't understand how high context works, and many more. Now, we're clear. I hope we're clear now with the high context. Now let's continue on the low context. A low context communicator does exactly the opposite of the high context communicator. Here, people do not assume that everyone has most of the information. They require in communication and communicate therefore needs to be more explicit. The message itself carries meaning, so information and details must be spelled out as the context is less important. The message is clear, direct, and detailed so that there can be no mistaking that what is intended as ambiguity is disliked. So in here, in low context organizations, the literal word and services that they are offering are now already written in their organizational name. So like for example, let's have Burger King. So Burger King already has the name burger. So it means that their specialty is consisting of different burgers, which I agree. Actually, Burger King is my favorite. And what else? Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut is serving solely of pizza. So that's very direct. You don't have to look for other meanings about Pizza Hut. What else? I guess that's it. Coffee Bean, another one, Coffee Bean. Coffee Bean is a low context, but they're also are very expensive. I mean, they're very much famous like the Starbucks. So as you can see, Starbucks is a high context, and then Coffee Bean is a low context. So as you can see in here, the message should be clear, direct, and also detailed because people in the low context does not like to be confused. So the countries that are in low context are Germans, Americans, Dutch, Scandinavians, British, Australians, and Canadians. So in here, they really like just getting to the point. They are the ones who actually work in a very fast manner and they don't want to overthink and double think or whatever they need to call it, just to understand what specific organizations are offering. They want everything to be clear, direct. They don't want it to be. They don't want to be confused. So written communication here is important. If in the high context, oral agreement is important. In here, written, everything that should be written is very much appreciated. Just like here in the Philippines, we are actually in the low context. Everything needs to be written. Everything needs to be said. It has to be direct. Because if it's not, secretive or distrustful content might arise in a person who is under a low context culture. So as you can see, high context, they believe that everything can be communicated with symbols and many more. And low context, they are the ones who are very secretive. I mean, low context, they don't want anything to be secretive. So here's an example or the definitions of the two. So I do suggest that you just pause this video so you can just check on the difference between the two. But before that, I would like to assure you guys that no matter what country you are, that's first world, second world, third world country that you are, the high context and low context does not correlate or does not say about where you are or about the knowledge of the country that you are. Okay, so a lot of countries a lot of services here in our country is very much accepted in the other countries. Like for example, Jollibee is a high context culture because Jollibee, I mean, there's no word of a happy meal or not happy meal, that's in McDonald's. There's no word of fried chicken there, but it's that's already implied that it's actually a fast food chain that offers a variety of food good for a family. So Jollibee, that's high context. So it came from the Philippines and it's very famous now in America and in other places across the world. So as you can see, high context and low context does not actually give you any background, or it doesn't say anything about where you came from and the economic status of the country where you came from. So we also have the monochronic and polychronic cultures. So again, we're still with Mildred and Edward T. Hall. When we say monochronic cultures, these are the culture in which they believe that time is important. They believe that time should be valued. it is something that should not be wasted. They value their time very much. All right, so in here, every communication should be linear, direct, and many more. So going back to Mildred T. Hall's high context and low context, monochronic people or monochronic cultures would prefer low context communication. So like what I've mentioned a while ago, Mildred T. Hall divided their concept of culture and communication using first the communication that's high and low context, and now we are now on the time. So in here, monochronic cultures value their time very much. Polychronic culture, on the other hand, sees it something that could take time. I mean, they will just take their time. So let's read on the underlined sentence. Time is therefore seen to be a commodity that can be manipulated, molded, stretched, or even done away with altogether. Some of the countries with polychronic are Arabs, Latin Americans, Africans, Southern Europeans, and most Asians tend to be polychronic, although the Chinese and in particular and the Japanese are much less so. So as you can see here, in polychronic, they would take their time. They would like to take their time. In monochronic, they value their time very much, but in polychronic, they just let it slide. I mean, they just take their time. That's why here in our country, we're actually polychronic. We just take our time. That's why the habit of being late, arriving class and late, arriving anywhere you go late, or because of that, we have now the term Filipino time. It's because of that, because our culture is polychronic culture. Further, monochronic culture are Germans, Dutch, Scandinavians, British, North Americans, Japanese, and Australians. So, to continue, it is also interesting to note that as polychronic countries industrialize, their business centers tend to be more monochronic. So, like what I've said, here in our country, we are polychronic. But when the BPO or the call centers actually started their businesses here in our country, the polychronic culture that the Filipinos usually have now becomes more monochronic. And in all honesty, most of the businesses that are successful now has a monochronic approach. Meaning to say, monochronic, they value their time very much. In polychronic approach, it's just an open door policy. Just do whatever you want, just do it at your own pace. That's why we have the term here, mañana habit. Oh, we can just do that tomorrow. I'll just do it later. And it's fine. I can just manipulate time. I'll do it whenever I'm free. Right? So, yeah, that's common in Latin cultures, Northern counterparts, and also Southerners. All right. Okay. So, in Southerners, they find it arrogant because they think people with the polychronic culture tends to have entitlement and many more. So they find it really rude. So Southerners look at them differently. So as you can see here, so we have again the summary. We have the monochronic at the left and then the polychronic at the right. You can just pause this video for you to see the difference between the two. So again, with Edward T. Hall and Mildred Hall, we have the high context and the low context, which talks about the communication, and also we have the monochronic and polychronic, which now talks about time. All right, so according to the Halls, furthermore in the time, we view time differently. When we say past-oriented cultures, these are cultures that are binded by the past. They still look onto their past to make decisions at the present. So they check on if their decision now will affect will be non-traditional, and it might hurt or others will find it disrespectful by the elders. So that's past-oriented cultures. Okay, so like for example, here, India and other Asian countries. Um, like here in the Philippines, we're actually past-oriented. We still believe, we still respect our past. We actually still make decisions based on our on our past, which is still good though, but sometimes it hinders us to grow. So that's why a lot of elders actually find some of the young ones to be arrogant and no respect to tradition. It's because we are still past oriented. Next is we have the present oriented culture. In here, we are living at the moment. We have this tendency of here and now. Don't think about the past, don't think about the future, it's just now. So Australia is one of that example. They really like to live at the moment. Next is the future-oriented culture. The future-oriented culture, these are the ones who look forward to the future. They like innovation, they like change, they like to do things that could help the future and also the day today. So their focus are planning, thinking, innovation, and many more. So the US is a good example. So that's why the US is actually the first number one country, as they say. It's a first country in the world because of that, because of the freedom to actually look into the future and not be bothered by the past and just live by the present. Just look at the future, plan the future, do something about the future, and to have a contribution about the future. So French, British tend to actually have traditions and cultural heritage, and they hold more about that. However, because now the USA is number one because of this, because they have this future-oriented culture. But of course, there are no better culture than the culture that you have today, right? Because if you go against the culture that you have today, that would be a problem. But past, present, or future-oriented culture, whatever that culture it is, it's just okay. It's just that so happened that future-oriented cultures tend to have more innovation and success in the world because of their approach. Okay, so Mildred and Hall and Edward T. Hall also have this concept of space. So we can talk about space and culture from two perspectives. Space around people, or this is the territoriality, and then the space between people, which is proxemics. So this is the personal space bubble that we have. So we people actually have the space. So it's either the territory that we have, like for example in our houses, we actually build some pader between our houses. This just to assure that we have this specific lot for ourselves and no one would squat around it. So that's actually space around people. And then space between people, that's why it's called between. Excuse me. Because of the proximity between the people. Okay? Okay, so excuse me on that. So there's a lot of countries actually that initiates or keep on doing this, but I would just want you to remember the space that is the space around people, which is this is the literal space that you have right now. So if that's your desk, that's only your desk. And then space between the people, or space between people, is this the space that we have between the people that we have. Like for example, even our loved one, I mean even the significant other that we have. So we still do some space for them, and they need space, and also we need space. So territoriality also concerns our own personal space, the space bubble that surrounds us, in which we feel most comfortable and which we claim as our own, almost as if we're an extension of our body. So in other countries, like the Great Wall of China, as you can see, there's territoriality there. Hadrian's Wall and the Berlin Wall also. And also our connotations like private, no trespassing, keep off the grass. don't block the driveway, and many more. These are signs of territoriality, or the space that we have, the space around people. This actually examples of space around people. And then space between people is the spaces that we give to ourselves between the person that we are close with. So Edward T. Hall and Richard R. Hall, as a result of their research, the Halls discovered the following. So if there is a high correlation between monochronic and low context, this is what I've said a while ago. Again, when we say monochronic, they actually they value they value time. They value time very much. And low context culture, because it's more direct, it's more, you don't have to think about anything else. It's just there. You don't have to interpret anything else. So it has a high correlation. While polychronic, which is the people that take their time, and high context cultures has high correlation as well. Again, high context cultures, this one needs an interpretation. It has underlying symbols, underlying meanings on the symbols, and many more. Okay, so that's how it works in the correlation. The higher the context of either the culture or the organization, the more difficult the interface. So again, if the culture has a high context, or it means that, for example, in an organization or in a classroom, everyone keeps on assuming, everyone does not want to be direct, the more difficult the culture is, or communication is. Okay, and the last, the greater the cultural distance, the more difficult the interface. So here, the greater the culture differences, the culture difference among in the organization, the more difficult it is as well. All right, so let me just give you the different dimensions, and also how it works. So for example, dimensions, the time, the polychronic just, they like to have, to just take their time, and it's under high context culture. And then the monochronic, they value their time so much, it's actually under low context. So I just do suggest that you just pause this video and just read it. All right, so we're done. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you were able to understand this lesson. So thank you very much, and I'll see you on our next class. See you then. Bye.